So I've been building out like a recipe book, and like I can find recipes online and then just like print the PDF of the website, and then when I go to save the PDF on my iPad, I just import it into GoodNotes and then import it into the back of that book.
I think it's interesting that there are all these bespoke recipe apps, and it turns out that it's just easier to print PDFs and put them in GoodNotes.
I've tried using recipe apps and they all kind of suck.
Yeah.
And I've also learned that, like, especially with the influx of AI written everything, where specifically recipe sites are getting way worse.
Are they worse than before? Because it was always the case that you'd get on like a blog or something and they'd have their life story before you got to the recipe.
Okay, no, that's all still bad. Like, it's still, you have to scroll through all of these ads or whatever, and it's just kind of like so much preamble and all this stuff in order to keep you on the website longer before you can find like the stupid box at the end that here are the ingredients and here's the instructions. Yep. But now, like, that's always been bad. And then additionally, there's groupthink about recipes, which is why I'm like more and more of the mind of like, I need to find an old like church cookbook where everybody's grandma put their recipes in, because those were like the recipes that we got from everybody and that sort of thing, rather than like, oh, I Googled how to make apple pie and I picked like the first result, and now that result keeps getting hit over and over and over. And now everyone has the same recipe for everything because of like internet groupthink.
Yeah.
And so it's like when you find a good recipe, you got to like save it somehow in your recipe book or whatever, because whenever you go to search it again, it may not be there. And then now, like that's how it's bad and before. And then now it's extra bad because more recipes are written by AI.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's like, oh, I'm going to search for a recipe, and people have like built out their recipe backlog on these like fake recipe websites or whatever. And you like get into it and it's like, oh, these ingredients are like the wrong amounts, or it's just kind of like made up some stuff, and you start to make it and it's like, oh, this is just wrong, or like it's missing something.
Yeah.
And if you don't know how to cook, it's like you're kind of stuck. But I don't know, it's recipes online are getting worse.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I feel like the problem with the, having the long preamble and having the ads is probably ultimately because there's not otherwise a good way to monetize that type of thing. So like if you write stuff on the internet about products, like something you can buy on Amazon, you can monetize that with something like Amazon affiliates, where when people click on those links, then you get money. And like that's a reasonable like business model.
Yeah.
And the problem with recipes is that most people buy their ingredients at grocery stores. And, there are ways you can buy groceries online, Whole Foods or whatever. And like, I mean, a lot of local grocery stores, like now, you can buy online. But still, like your average person is not getting on a recipe website and then buying the ingredients through there. And even if they do, the amount you're going to get as the writer is, like very, very low.
I don't know if people cook like I do. I mean, some people, oh, I want to make this thing. They find it and then they go and they buy the ingredients after they see it. But like if you cook long enough and you know how to cook, you basically have everything that you need on hand. Like I didn't used to stock like eggs and cream and like lemon juice and that sort of, things like that. But now I do, because I know that like I'm going to use these things or like breadcrumbs or whatever whenever I cook. And so 9 times out of 10, I'll go to a website to find a recipe for something, and I already have everything. And I'm more just like, I'm standing in the kitchen and I know I have chicken and I know I have like everything else in there, and I just don't know what to make with the chicken. So I'm just looking for ideas. Yeah. And I may find like 3 different recipes and I'm like, okay, inspiration. I'm just going to make like whatever. But I feel like I would assume the people who like me, they're not even ever buying anything. They're just like standing in their kitchen trying to get the information as fast as they can.
Yeah. Yeah. So they're definitely not like going to click and buy. So that's why you need like ads or, or something to get people to, like do something that will make you money.
Right. Right.
But the AI thing is also a big problem, because I feel like AI doesn't know what truth is.
No.
And that's a big problem everywhere, but it's especially bad with stuff like recipes, where like you said, if the ingredients are wrong or if the instructions are just like slightly off, maybe you won't even notice until you're into it. And then it's like, oh, this is just totally a non-starter because of this like completely made up AI thing.
Yeah. It's, or like if you just don't know how to like reduce something properly, or like when to like some people don't add herbs to your chicken before you, I don't know, like sear it so that the herbs don't burn. Like that, some people will say that. Like, I mean, who knows if like the AI is going to get that right? It could just be like wrong, and then all of a sudden you've like burned oregano. I don't know.
Yeah, you never want to burn the oregano. Welcome back to the Camera Gear Podcast. I'm Daniel.
And I'm Lucas.
And we're here today to talk about the gear, software, and techniques we use to shoot photos and video.
I've been using tab groups in Safari to organize all of my tabs for the show as like things from week to week that I know we're going to talk about, but I didn't go through and delete like the open tabs and stuff. And now I just have an ungodly amount of tabs.
Tab chaos.
I'm just gonna have to wing it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna no internet show kind of thing.
Oh man. So you're over there using that massive iPad, and before we started, you were complaining that you forgot your keyboard.
Yep.
And what I'm wondering, and what some of our listeners are wondering, is why don't you just get a MacBook Air?
I feel like we've covered this ad nauseum in previous episodes about like why I use the iPad, not a MacBook Air. And I mean, we can rehash it, I guess.
I feel like people who have been listening to the show for a long time don't want us to rehash it, but new people probably are kind of like, why doesn't he just get a laptop?
Because like whenever we started the show, I didn't have an iPad.
Yeah.
And now I've had 2 iPads. And there's just been a lot of hemming and hawing and hooting and hollering. So I think the answer is just go back and listen to all 112 episodes before this, and then it's like
the only way to know.
I'm not going to point you out to which ones. Just go back and listen to all 112. It's only going to take you a little while.
I feel like the simplest answer is that you like having the drawing capability, like for your day job, as well as like for things like designing sets for film shoots and taking notes and stuff like that. And there's no Macs that have touchscreens.
I use the pencil way more than I thought I would. It is one of my primary input devices for this iPad, but I use the iPad without a keyboard probably 85% of the time. I just don't really care to have a keyboard on it at all. I want to use it as like a giant touch screen device where I'm like dragging things around, and like whenever I have to do a lot of text entry, the text input on the iPad just sucks. And so sometimes I need the keyboard, but it's not often enough. It's just one of the things I need it for is whenever we do this podcast, it's nice to not have to like poke at a screen whenever I want to take a few notes here and there. And Google Docs doesn't support pen input, or else I would be just marking up with the pencil the whole time.
Yep. I feel like of the two of us, I'm the one that could really use a laptop instead of an iPad because I hardly ever take it out of the Magic Keyboard case. But for me, my laptop is a 16-inch MacBook Pro, and the 11-inch iPad is a lot smaller and lighter than that. And so that's part of it. And then the other part is that I kind of like the simplicity. Like you can make the iPad pretty complicated, like with Stage Manager, and you can have multiple things open. But I kind of like that it focuses me more on a single like app at a time. And I find if I'm trying to like write an article or something, I actually kind of like doing it on the iPad because I just feel like there's less distracting me. I'm less likely to go and just randomly look something up on the internet that's totally unrelated, or I don't know. It's simpler, and I like that it's simpler, and that's why I use it. Yeah,
that makes sense. And for me, it's mostly just a matter of that it's the things that I use it for, like photo editing feels better because you're like directly manipulating like with the sliders and the pencil, and it's like you're like holding the screen, and it's maybe a little, I don't know, it feels a little cleaner and easier for me. And then I do a lot of like drawing markups and stuff like that. And so it's just kind of, I don't know, the things that I use it for are just better.
Yep.
Note taking and that sort of stuff. So
that said, the MacBook Air is an incredible laptop.
Oh yeah. If I just need a keyboard for text input and that sort of stuff and like computer things, MacBook Air would probably be a way simpler solution.
The other day I saw you can get an M1 MacBook Air. I think like the base model, 256 storage and 8 gigs of RAM for $600 new from Walmart.
That's so cheap.
That is a really good deal. Like if you don't have strong computing needs, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably do video editing or something, so maybe that's not going to be enough. But if you just need a basic computer, that's probably the best deal you're ever going to find.
But Daniel, it's not going to support Apple Intelligence.
I think it does support Apple Intelligence.
It doesn't have 16 gigs of RAM.
Yeah, maybe that is a limitation.
Whatever. Anyway, There's too many things on these show notes, Daniel.
There's quite a bit.
There's one topic here of how many megapixels do you need? I don't even think we talk about that today. That's just too many.
I don't know how we could. I don't know how we could count.
Yep. This next one also going to take too long. I think we're going to have to come back to those if we have time.
Okay.
I want to talk about this dual voltage sensor thing.
Yeah. Tell me what that means. Is that like a dual gain?
No, it's not a dual gain. It's a dual voltage. So Nikon / Red, not Nikon.
Same company now.
Redcon. What are we calling it? Nikon. Rikon.
I don't think there's a good way to combine those.
I think I've heard one that's pretty good. Anyways, they have submitted a patent, a U.S. patent, for a new dual voltage sensor. It's not a global sensor. It's like a CMOS type.
Okay.
And which, maybe some question there as far as like we thought that, Nikon was probably gonna like push for global. Red's got some global sensors. I think Red, I don't know who makes Red sensors. I assume that Red designs them. But the idea between like this dual voltage control system is that by providing the two different voltage options like into the sensor configuration, it's like you can get lower noise in certain extreme lighting conditions, and then you can improve readout speed, and which helps with like 8K video and like faster readouts and more bursts and that sort of stuff. So it's like better noise and better readouts off of these like dual voltage configurations. Not really saying anything as far as like stacked or like and it's global, that sort of stuff, but it's this kind of like new technology for like how you're powering the sensor, which can improve like the readout speeds and that sort of thing. And it's just a patent that Nikon has submitted.
If anything, it's kind of cool to see because Nikon has used Sony sensors, as does a lot of the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it'd be great to see more people making sensors, and like maybe that's how you get some more advancements, of just different technologies and different people looking at the problem, like rather than it just being Sony, driving this whole, all the technology forward. I think that's great.
Yeah, that's the nail on the head. I'm kind of hand waving around exactly like what this patent is and like the depth of the technology behind it, because I think that the more interesting thing here is Nikon submitting a patent for a sensor and the concept that Nikon's going to be making sensors. Now that they have Red and they have those chops behind them and they've brought, expanded their company in this way, Nikon getting into a place where they are controlling their destiny as far as like the direction that their sensors are going, so that they can do things like focus on, the raw video aspects of NRAW and Red Raw and the cinema side, that they are now like a owner of one of the big cinema companies. Red's not huge. I guess Nikon was like 40 times the size of them. Anyways, but then also, their photos, all their photo stuff is Sony. And so will no longer be beholden to Sony if they start producing their own sensors. So I think it's really exciting. And in the last like 2 years, it feels like Nikon has just like come out of nowhere. It's like, what's Nikon even doing? Like they're barely even making cameras, and now all of a sudden Nikon is innovating and buying companies and really pressing in the photo sphere for like, camera market.
I was going to say the same thing. It feels like when we started this podcast, a little over 2 years ago, we made a lot of jokes about how Nikon was like kind of becoming obscure. Mm-hmm. And I think some people that listen to this show have probably been shooting on Nikon for a long time, and so they're kind of laughing at us. But, it seems like in like the public opinion, especially among video shooters, it definitely felt like Nikon was kind of...
Well, yeah, it was like the top two brands it's like, it was always Nikon and Canon, and then it's like, well, Nikon's done, and it's Sony and Canon now.
It felt like Nikon was like this has-been. Mm-hmm. And then now, they've got some really good cameras with like the Z8 and Z9, and, it just seems like they're building momentum. They bought Red, and now they're doing this stuff with sensors.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they're coming back.
Yeah, I'm excited to see this patent, and I'm just more and more excited to see what Nikon's doing, and just I don't know, it's good, it's all good.
Yeah, cool.
Did we mention this is our Sony episode?
As we've talked about Apple and Nikon so far.
Yeah, we'll get there. You want to talk about lomography now?
Yeah, it's this show, right? We have to hit some film sometime.
Well, sure. This thing has a giant flash on it. Does it come with the flash?
I think it does. So I saw this article on Petapixel earlier, and I send you a lot of links about camera news.
Yeah, you do. We even have a segment about it.
So many that we sometimes have a segment. And sometimes I send you stuff, and I don't know if this is going to, end up on the show or not. Sometimes I see something and I just immediately know it's going to be something we talk about. And I happened to see this today, and I knew we were going to be recording in 3 or 4 hours later. And I said, Lucas is going to want to talk about this.
You sent this to me before I even saw it, which is pretty good. This is the Lomography. What are they calling it? The Lomography.
Yeah.
And it is a half frame camera, very much in the spirit of the Kodak H35, or is it the E35? Do you remember what that's called?
It was in the article, but I don't remember what.
I think it's the H35N. Yeah. So Kodak makes this Ektar H35 half frame camera that's like $40. It's got a plastic lens. It's f8, and you just put the film in and shoot. And you don't really have any control at all. It's always going to shoot at like 1/100 or 1/150 or something like that. And you just kind of like let it rock and roll. This is maybe a little more innovative in that it has 2 apertures. You can shoot at f8 or f11. I don't know if you can really control it. It's a 1/60 shutter speed. You can get a flash that goes on it, which is cool that it has flash sync. Otherwise, this is like a half frame, super cute, like point and shoot camera.
Yep. It's a 24 millimeter lens.
Okay.
It says 24 millimeter focal length. I don't know how that works with half frame. Like, I don't know what the effective is. It's 24 like the.
It's kind of like APS-C-ish. I mean, you just have to think about it as the crop. Like if you shot a 24 millimeter frame and then you just cut it in half.
Yeah.
Like that's your framing. It's effectively like 32 to 35 if you're trying to like do math.
I see. Okay. So 24 millimeters. Shutter speed is 1/60 or bulb. So you can, I think that's where you like hold it down.
Oh yeah, you can hold it and then it lets rock and roll.
Can't change the ISO. That's probably one of the big limitations.
Well, Daniel, the film is the ISO.
Yeah. Yeah, but
you can change the ISO. Just put a different film in there.
There you go. Yeah, I just mean I guess you can't adjust like the metering or whatever. Like, what does that?
Well, yeah, I mean, like you have to be able to tell it what ISO the film is that you're sticking in there. I would assume that available ISO setting means that you can't.
Well, but why would you need it? You don't need to tell it that actually, because you have a fixed aperture and a fixed shutter speed. So,
but it still needs to know. It needs to know how to expose, basically. Like, you have a fixed aperture and fixed shutter speed. Yeah, I guess so. I guess it's not going to do anything.
What decision is it making?
You're right.
So, I guess that's why. And I don't think it has autofocus. So I think it's like a zone focus thing, which if it's f8, f11, it's probably not a big deal. But
the vibes are strong with this one.
Yes, it comes in colors. One of them is a mint green that I thought you would probably think was cool. And it also comes with a flash that is huge.
The flash is as big as the camera, I think, which I still love it.
Yep. It looks like it takes one AA battery.
Okay.
Yep.
Very good.
It looks pretty small. Like, they show it like in people's hands, and it's like palm size, little tiny camera.
Yep. It's super, super cool. I did not immediately buy one of these.
I'm kind of surprised. It's $70. I was like, this might be impulse buy territory.
It is definitely impulse buy territory. I resisted buying a Kodak H35N, and I'm going to go ahead and resist this one here because I'm saving up all those impulse buys because I want to get a Pentax 17.
Yeah, because the Pentax 17 is basically, I mean, it's a half frame camera, but it has all the features, right? Like you can actually adjust things like the aperture.
It has a real lens. It has range focus. You can push and pull stops by aligning with the ISO on your film. You can change your shutter, you don't change your shutter speed, but you have all the different modes. It's still not like a full camera, but it's more.
Well, yeah, it's a half frame camera.
Heyo, it's more feature rich than something like this. I love these little disposable type film cameras. I think that for the people that just want, they want to shoot film on a lark, and they don't want to have to go out and find an old Canon AE1 for $150 or something. They just want to be able to point and shoot, not have to expose, not have to focus.
Well, and with half frame, you're getting twice as many shots per roll of film, so it's cheaper to shoot.
Yeah. It's Kodak's making these. Lomography is always into the, here's some cool films and here's some bespoke stuff and here's some vibes. This is perfect. I love it. And more of these. I want more people shooting film. If this makes the youngsters shoot more film, great.
It seems like it's happening. I also saw today that Kodak is temporarily stopping production of film, which sounds bad, but the reason they're stopping the production of film is because they need to modernize their factory because so many people want to shoot film that they're like, okay, we need to lean into this. And
I love that.
They have to do upgrades or something. And so they're temporarily pausing so that they can ramp up. So.
And Christmas is coming up. And so different family members and that sort of thing are like, well, man, Lucas, what do you want for Christmas? And I've been telling people the same thing I told them on my birthday, which was buy me rolls of film. If I can get anyone who wants to buy me a Christmas gift this year to give me film rolls, because it's cheap, right?
Yeah. I
get tired of just having things and having to do things with things. It's I have more things now and I have to get rid of other things. And it's just, there's too much stuff. And if all gifts were something that was consumable, right?
Yeah,
it was here's
a good idea.
Coffee or bullets or something. I don't know. It's just something that you can use.
Yep.
And here's a massage or whatever. Film is one of those things. And if everyone gave me a bunch of film,
good point,
then I could just not buy any film next year.
Yep.
I don't shoot that much film. If I somehow acquired, 16 rolls of film,
that's a lot of film.
That's probably all the film I'm going to shoot next year.
Yeah.
Perfect.
A year of free film shooting.
Yep.
Perfect for you.
Perfect. So, I think everyone should do it.
Yeah.
If you're trying to figure out what to give your family for Christmas, I don't care if they're into photography.
Just give them film.
Just give them film. They'll figure it out.
Yep.
I mean, maybe you have a little extra money and you can afford a $40 to $70 half frame camera to go with it.
There you go.
Sure.
Even
why
better.
not? That's still to develop the film. It's a chore or whatever, but
just find somewhere that can get it developed.
Might as well.
Yeah.
Give them a little gift card to whatever was it. Dark Room? Is that the website that does where you can mail them the film?
Oh, I have no idea, but that sounds like a website that would allow that. So maybe so.
Darkroom, probably .com. .biz is a different thing.
Yeah. Don't go to darkroom.biz.
Yeah, definitely don't go
Avoid
there.
that.
Cool. Okay, Daniel. We need to talk about what this show is really about, which is the Sony A1 II, which is the new Sony flagship recently announced.
I had seen some rumors that Sony was going to be announcing a camera in November, and then when it got closer, they were very clear that it was going to be the A1 Mark II, and then it actually happened. So all those things are things that happened in the past, and now we are talking about them.
That is an accurate statement. Well done, Daniel. Perfect recap.
Yes.
Well, don't know what else there is to say. Are you up to speed on this new camera, what they announced and all that sort of stuff?
A little bit. So, I saw some of the basics. I think we should maybe run through some of the changes and some of the specs because I didn't go too deep into it. More of what I saw was the reaction to it, which is, I'm sure we'll spend some time talking about that. But let's start with what did they do in this and kind of what's different from the original A1?
Okay, so this is the new flagship Sony camera, the one.
And it's kind of interesting because when the A9 Mark III came out, we were like, wait a minute, why isn't this the A1 Mark II?
Yep.
But now they have the A1 Mark II.
Yep, and it's $500 more than the A9 Mark III at $6,500.
That's quite a bit of money.
It sure is. Same price, I believe, as the A1 when it released. And whenever the A1 came out, it was basically a revolution, right? It was, I think, the first real stacked sensor camera that we were seeing in the market. It was shooting 50 megapixel photos at 30 frames per second and all this crazy stuff.
Yeah. And this was back in 2021 or something, I think.
Right. Yeah. January 2021 was whenever the A1 was released. I was going to say A1 Mark I, but we don't really say the Mark I, do you?
Yeah. At the time, it was just the A1.
Anyway, okay. So 4 years later, 4 years later, what's Sony going to do? Are they going to revolutionize the photo community again, industry, whatever? And the answer is basically no. They took all of the things that they've invented and put in cameras since the A1, stuck it in the A1, and called it the 2.
Yeah. But like the sensor and the EVF and stuff are all the same.
It's all the same. So it's the same ILCE1 IMX 610 50 megapixel sensor, 100 whatever ISO 100 to an extended 102,000 ISO. It's the same 9.4 million dot EVF that goes up to 120 frames per second. It doesn't shoot any faster. It can shoot compressed RAW up to 30 frames per second. It's still the same video specs, which are all kind of like not compromised, but have like weird crops to them where it's like if you want to shoot oversampled 4K, it doesn't oversample from 8K. It oversamples from like 6K and has like a 10% crop or something to it. But you can shoot that 4K up to 120 frames per second if you want. I think in like a line skipped. But if you want oversampled, it only does like 60 and blah, 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 blah. It's kind of all of those like weird video things where it's really, really capable, but also maybe not their best video camera that you might be looking at other Sony platforms.
It feels more to me like this is a photo camera that can do video if you want to do video.
And it can really do video because it has like all that readout speed and stuff, and it's a good sensor and that sort of thing. But I don't know. I think that I think maybe I've caught a little bit of heat because I've been pretty down on the A1 for as a video camera before. And like it is really capable and it's a really good sensor, really good camera. I just always think that like you can kind of get the same thing out of something that's half the price.
Yeah, if what you're doing, if you have the A1, then great. But if what you're doing is video, it's probably not the camera you go and buy.
Yeah. And then now here's the A1 II, and it's just the same thing. It's like the same thing.
Yeah.
And there's nothing, they brought the new processor, they brought the AI like co-processor thing, and they added all of those AI features for like focusing and like reframing and all this sort of stuff. And they're going to get like better noise performance and just kind of better image off of the sensor, but that didn't yield any changes to the video specs.
Yeah. I mean, they did add some useful stuff. Like they've got the focus breathing compensation.
And I think that actually
is better.
I think the focus breathing came in a firmware to the A1 previously, but there's a lot of things that just never came, like the pre-shooting modes where you can like up to a second pre-shoot before you take the image, where it's going to buffer, and then when you pull the shutter, it shoots whatever like the last second before it, and like there's things like integral like LUTs where you can like bake in a LUT and like use like the overdrive function for if like they brought out with the A9 III, where it's like you're shooting and then you can hit a button and it increases the frames per second for as long as you're pressing the button, things like that. All the stuff that came with like the ZVE10, where it's like the vlog reframing thing and all of those like vloggy mode features and what have you. There's all of this stuff that came out since 2021 in Sony cameras that hasn't really ever made it back to the A1.
Yeah.
And they essentially took all of those features, wrapped them together, and put them into this camera.
They do have some physical changes, right? So like the screen style is the new like double flippy screen thing. Did they change something there?
The entire body is the same as the A9 III.
Okay.
And the A9 III is a pretty big jump in ergonomics and features over the previous cameras. The grip is substantially bigger. It's more comfortable, more ergonomic. It has that super cool multi-variable Sony screen that both is flippy and tilty at the same time. So you no longer have to decide if you're team tilty screen or team flippy screen. And it's a good body. It's got a lot of good custom mode buttons. It's got the joysticks. They added the button on the front, all this sort of stuff. And so they took that pretty successful configuration and then just copy paste.
Yeah.
And so it's like all of the good physical design things that they've done and all the good software stuff that they've done. They're like, okay, let's not really invent anything new. Let's just take all of the best everything from Sony and put it into one camera and then call it the A1 II. And then that's what they did.
Yep.
And that's totally successful. I think it's all the stuff that Sony is doing is pretty good. And so it's like all the good things in one thing. I think that where a lot of maybe the griping about the A1 II is like it's in the shadow of the A1. And as when the A1 came out and it was like, this is a revolutionary camera and $6,500, and that makes total sense. This is more of a evolutionary camera that is basically on par with the competition now because everyone's caught up, but it costs $2,000 more.
Yeah. And I mean, I think Sony has this reputation for wowing everybody with these big new features and, things that people haven't seen before. I mean, things like the original A1, the A9 Mark III, the Burano. I mean, it just seems like they're constantly releasing like these really exciting new cameras. And then the A1 II is kind of just, it feels more like an evolutionary update rather than a revolutionary update.
Yep.
And I think people were a little disappointed by that.
I felt like last year this time when they announced the A1 III, I was like,
the A9 III.
Thank you, the A9 III. It's like your socks are blown off. This thing was crazy.
Yeah.
Global sensor, all this sort of
hype.
stuff, 120 frames per second photo, et cetera, et cetera. Amazing. Super awesome. And I think that we kind of get a little jaded and want that from Sony every time.
Yeah.
And whenever they come out and say like, this is our flagship, and there's nothing really about it that doesn't wow you in the same way. It's like, oh, it's kind of a disappointment. There's nothing bad about this camera. It's like extremely good. It's just that it's like, well, now I have to pick between the A1 II and the A9 III.
Yeah.
And that decision comes down to speed versus megapixels.
Yeah.
And I guess like the hope out of the Sony flagship is the camera that you don't have to choose.
Right.
And that choice is still there. I think it's always going to be there, but
I do think if you're a fan of the A1 and if you're the kind of person who can spend the money on that flagship, I still think this is probably an exciting update because you are getting all these features that have come to the rest of their lineup. And yeah, I mean, it's like if I have the money to spend on the flagship, I want all the things. And so from that perspective, I think it's cool that they did all this stuff. And that, like that's one less thing that you're having to pick between of like, well, I like these AI features, but I really want this high megapixel fast sensor. Now you can get all that in one thing, but yeah, it's just not as big of a jump as like whatever was before the A1 to the A1.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there was nothing before the A1.
Yeah. I guess it would have been like the A7R3 or whatever was out then.
Yeah. Basically R4 or something like that. So I think it's a really cool release and it's a really good release. I'm going to maybe run through my questions here at you, which was, I think I already asked that question. So it's like A1, A2, it's the same sensor. Canon's released the R1 and the R5 Mark II.
Yep.
And the R5 Mark II is like 44 megapixels, stacked sensor, highly competitive with the Sony one. Sony one, maybe it's like a slightly better dynamic range, slightly higher resolution. The Canon one, I think, is going to read out maybe a little faster. Canon is probably going to have maybe the edge on autofocus just because it has some of those like specific, like you can be like, I'm shooting basketball players.
Yeah.
And it can do that predetermination stuff for focusing where it's like, you can track it passing and it knows, anyways, whatever. So like maybe the Canon has a little edge on there, but as far as like ISO performance and the sensor and the speed and all that stuff, the R5 Mark II has a very competitive sensor with the A1 and now the A1 Mark II.
Yeah.
We're like even now, right? Both of those cameras came out this year. They're on par with each other. Is Sony missing a trick here and that they haven't pushed that technology forward and so now they could stand to fall behind Canon over the next 4 years?
Yeah, I mean the price I think is the main factor because the R5 Mark II is so much cheaper than the A1 Mark II. And I mean if the technology's not there, then what can they do? Like if they don't have something else that's better, then this is the best they can do. But yeah, they're kind of in this unfortunate position where Canon has caught up to them. Mm-hmm. And, it's like, do they have something that they can release next year to jump ahead again? Or what happens over the next, 3 years? I'm not sure. I mean, I feel like people at this price point are kind of already invested in a system. Like they've been shooting one of these for a long time. They're probably not going to jump brands just to save a little bit of money. Like they may already have a lot of lenses or they may just be used to the menus or whatever. But I just have to imagine anybody buying a $4,000 or $6,000 camera is probably like, they're probably not value shopping at that point, I guess.
Right. Yeah. They're shopping based upon the needs of what they're shooting. Mm-hmm. I think that, Canon hit it out of the park with the R1 and the R5 Mark II. And like with the A9 III and the A1, it feels like those are basically basically pair off against the Canon in that way, where it's like your A9 III competes with the R1 and your A1 II compete with the R5 Mark II.
Yeah, I'd say so.
And that's totally reasonable. I think that it's probably good for Sony that Canon's pushing them so hard, because it kind of felt like for a long time Canon's just really dragging their feet and taking a long time. Can't seem to figure out the global sensor yet. And Sony is just running away with it, especially with like the release of the A9 III last year before Canon came out with their new cameras. It's just kind of embarrassing. It's
I
like,
agree.
geez, what's Canon even doing? And now it's like the tables have turned a bit, and like we have really good offerings from Canon that are highly competitive with these. And the most kind of hard thing for Sony here is that this is still their flagship, and they're pricing it like they're comparing it to the Canon R3, but the Canon R3 is a totally different camera. It's a sports camera that can shoot, 40 frames per second raw, and it's lower megapixel, but if you're looking for speed, it's better than the A1 Mark II. And if you're going to compare it, then okay, well, I just want high resolution. The R5 Mark II is $2,000 cheaper.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about Nikon with their sensors, and then now we're seeing that Canon is catching up to Sony's new flagship. And all around, it feels like, whereas Sony seemed like they were kind of running away with it in a sense, it seems like now it's kind of a battle again, which is, it's probably good for us. But I think it would make it hard to pick between these because, price-wise, like the Canon seems like a better deal to me. But I think if you're a Sony bro, you're not going to switch systems just for that.
Sure. But you mentioned Nikon. You have to also compare this to what Nikon is offering. Whenever the A1 II came out, it wasn't much, or A1 original came out, it wasn't much longer before Nikon released the Z9. And I remember when the Z9 came out, there was a lot of conversation of like, oh, is this the same sensor as the A1? I thought it was. It's like it is actually a slightly different sensor, but it's competitive. I think that the sensor in the A1 does maybe like a third stop better dynamic range, essentially across the board for performance at every ISO. It's like a third stop better for dynamic range. But otherwise, like the Z9 sensor is pretty clean, very fast, and it's an extremely good sensor. And so they're essentially comparable. And then Nikon took the same sensor from the Z9, which was competitive with the A1, and they stuck it in the Nikon Z8 and then charged $2,000 less for that camera.
Yeah.
And you can go out and buy a Z8 for like whatever, $3,500 or something. It's another $1,000 cheaper than the R5 Mark II. And like you're taking steps down. Like you can tell just by the EVF. Like the A1 II has a $9 million EVF. You go down to a 5.6 for the Canon R5 Mark II, and then you go down to a 3.7 for the Nikon Z8. So it's like some of those features start dropping off. The Nikon isn't necessarily going to have as good autofocus as the A1 II with the whole AI chip and the auto whatever, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But if you're just looking for a really fast 48 megapixel to 50 megapixel stacked sensor and something that has really good video features and can shoot RAW and all this sort of stuff, the Z8 is nearly half the price. And that's kind of like a hard pill to swallow if you're looking to move up from something like, say it's like, it's me. And I'm like, oh man, I'm tired of shooting Fuji and I'm ready to like buy a full frame camera. What do I pick? And it's like,
there's no way you'd be picking the Sony, like not when the other options exist and not when you don't already have full frame.
Yeah. If I'm not invested and I'm looking to like make that move or like switch or whatever, and I'm looking for like the top end camera, I'd be hard pressed to pick the A1 II over either the Nikon or the Canon.
Yeah. It does seem like they have a hard time justifying the price. Like you mentioned the EVF, I think that's probably one big factor that's adding cost here. And I don't know how expensive that sensor is, but it's probably not, twice as expensive as it needs to be because they do have a lot of features in this camera, but it does feel like they're pricing it higher than the market has decided cameras like this should cost.
Yeah, it does really feel that way. And I don't know, I think that it's more of like this is the price point for this camera. And if it's their flagship, it has to be the most expensive. And like they're kind of stuck. They can't really charge less for it. it does have a lot of like cool features, right? Like they added auto detect for the autofocus. So it's like not like auto like cars, but you can just set it to auto and it'll be like, oh, that is a bird. We're going to put it in bird mode. Oh, that's a dog. Let's put it in animal mode. And you don't have to like manually switch between the two. Mm-hmm. You can just like set it in auto if you don't know what you're shooting.
Yeah. We've seen that on some other cameras too.
Have we?
Yeah, I think there's a Fuji camera that does it.
Oh, does the M5 do it?
I think the M5 might do it. I think the XS20 might do it.
No.
So there's some stuff out there that does.
Well, neither of my Fuji cameras do it, so it doesn't exist. Dead to me.
Yeah, I mean, Sony has a lot of really cool features with this stuff, like the automatic tracking, and things like that. Like it definitely has cool features, but I don't know if it has $6,500 worth of them.
It doesn't have a LUT button.
Doesn't have a LUT button, but it does support LUTs in the camera now,
yeah,
right?
It does. It does. That's something that you can now do.
Mm-hmm.
They are sticking with CF Express A 2.0. They didn't like jump to 4.0, so it's still the slower CF Express A. They're still the only people who are doing A and not B.
Yeah, that's annoying.
It's cool that they do the double slots where you can use SD or CF Express, but it's kind of frustrating that you have to invest in all new media if you're going to switch to Sony, because they are just sticking with Type A.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't really know too much about the difference between A and B other than the form factor. I thought that B in like if its equivalence was maybe a little slightly faster, but I'm not totally sure about that.
It's just such a classic Sony move to be like, if you want to use our stuff, you've got to use this weird memory format that nobody else uses. Like, that's very classic for them.
Yeah, different card. I mean, it seems like most of the rest of the industry is coalescing around Type B.
Yeah, I feel like that's what I've seen.
So
I feel like CF Express is such an interesting thing where before I got a camera that used it, I kind of looked down on it and like, well, why wouldn't you just use an SD card? These CF Express things are so expensive, and why would anybody want that? And now that I've used it, I kind of want all my cameras to have CF Express Type B because it's very nice.
It unlocks features. There are things that you can like, even on your XH2S, there are things that you can do on the CF Express that you can't do on the SD.
Yeah, regardless of whether you have a V90 SD card, like you just can't do it.
Yeah, and I think that isn't that an issue with the R5 Mark II where it has one CF Express and one SD, and so like you can't necessarily do like full redundancy on certain things?
I think that's right. Yeah,
I might be mixing that up with a different camera.
I mean, there have been several cameras recently that we've seen where they didn't they don't have it. They don't have the cheaper version. Doesn't have CF Express. Instead, it just has SD, and because of that, it's limited. I can't remember which specific ones I'm thinking of.
I remember that camera.
Several cameras like that. I feel like.
It was like the C80.
Yeah, the C80 is a good example of it, I think, where it just,
because the C400, it was the exact same sensor, but they put the CF Express B in there, and they didn't do it in the C70, essentially to hardware lock it.
That's what I was thinking of. So, but I mean, also when you pull footage, like it's so much faster with CF Express.
Way faster.
And I'm sure you get most of those benefits with Type A versus Type B, but yeah, I mean, now that I've got a Type B card, like it would be annoying to buy a camera that didn't use CF Express but didn't use Type B.
Yeah, I think that maybe one of the big advantages of the A is it is much smaller in size, and so you can do what Sony's doing, which is put two CF Express A slots in it, whereas most cameras are not necessarily giving you two CF Express B slots, and it limits the amount of the redundancy if you're using the more faster shooting mode type.
Good point.
Features.
Yeah, the only cameras I've ever seen with two are like cinema style cameras, like a Blackmagic Ursa, that kind of thing.
Right. It's same. I do tend to like on my XH2S, all my video stuff goes to CF Express and all my photo stuff goes to SD, and I just kind of know that if I took photos, it's on the SD card, and if I took video, it's on the CF Express card.
Yeah, that's a pretty reasonable way to do it.
Yeah. Anyway. Sony A1 II.
Yeah, and you have a question on here that I think is interesting, which is why buy the A1 II when the A1 exists? Because now you can get the A1 cheaper, right?
So like there were hardware things like the AI processor, the entire body is different. Great, like those are fantastic improvements. A lot of this is software. A lot of the features that they've been rolling out, like sure, they're probably dependent upon the coprocessor and all this sort of thing, and they couldn't do them, but like, since the A1 released, it's like, here's the A7 IV. Where are some of these features? Here's the ZVE1. where are some of these features? Why are they not on the flagship? Why are they not on the flagship? And like, he'll been hemming and hawing about it for the last 4 years. And it feels like, call it 40% of what the A1 II is, could have been a firmware upgrade.
Yeah, it does kind of seem that way.
And
is this like the camera update version of that meeting could have been an email?
A little bit. And the A1 is still a very good camera, despite all of the terrible, horrible things that I've said about it. And it's the same sensor. So like, you're going to get that level of speed and image quality. And if you're not like struggling for autofocus, then like the A1's maybe good enough. Like if you don't need the pre-shooting, you don't need the autofocus ability, you're not like getting blisters from the grip, like you don't need a flippy screen. It's like maybe the A1 is probably good enough for a lot of people, and you can buy them used for like $4,400.
Yeah, you're saving $2,000 by buying a used older version.
Yeah, I mean that's still the price of a new R5 Mark II. And it's still more expensive than an Nikon Z8. So you could probably buy a used Z8 for in the $3,000 range. But even still, it's maybe, to me, it's kind of a hard sell for the A1 over the A1 II. And Sony doesn't ever stop selling cameras. Like you go to their website and you're like, how many cameras does Sony make? It's like 50. Because like they're still selling like the A6000 or whatever, or the 6100 for some reason. Brand new. Here's a 10-year-old camera, brand spanking new. And so like the A1, I think is like $5,500 new. And I don't think they're going to take it off the shelf. They're going to still make and let you buy that camera when it's kind of the same camera.
Yeah, that's kind of weird that they have both of those.
Yeah, I don't know. I would kind of wish it was a little cheaper. I mean, obviously like the A7R5 is, what is it? It's like 4,000 or 4,500. So like there is enough of a gap there, but it's like 5,500 for the A1, 6,000 for the A9 II, A9 III, and then 6,500 for the A1 II.
Right.
And it's like, is $1,000 enough of a savings there? Like if they went even cheaper, would they cut into their sales too much of the A1 II? Why are all these cameras not $500 cheaper?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. It seems weirdly expensive.
Yeah, I think that's maybe the biggest thing about this. But also, like, if you need those features and you're like a Sony person, maybe this upgrade makes sense.
It just kind of feels like a pro tax to me. Like it feels like they're charging it because they can. I don't know.
Yeah, I think maybe part of it is they're Sony and they can do that.
Yeah.
I also think the other part of it is they're just kind of stuck in their price brackets, and that in 4 years when they come out with the A1 III, and like they do this a lot. They'll do like the TikTok thing where it's like, we're going to use the sensor for a couple generations kind of thing. Like they've used the sensor that's in the A7S III in like 1 billion cameras, and they're still putting it in cameras. It's like, that sensor's 4 or 5 years old, and they're like, still pretty good. Anyway, like, so maybe like they're TikToking, and in 4 years, whenever they come out with the A1 III or whatever, it's going to be like global sensor, 100 megapixels or something stupid.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, amazing. And then maybe it's still $6,500. Now it's like, oh, wow, this is an amazing camera for that price.
Sure.
But I think that the only reason they can do that is because even in the, I don't want to call it an off year, but even in the off years, it's like, it's just the same price.
Yeah, so it's just like the A1 series fits in this $6,500 bracket.
Yeah, like I don't think that they're going to, like if they drop the price of this by $500 or something like that, and then they raise it again with the next one, they could probably justify it. But I think that it makes it easier if it's just like, this is the price bracket for this camera.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
I don't know, Daniel. I think this is like, it's great. It's like, on the face of it, for what it is, this is an amazing camera. It's just that everyone's caught up with them.
Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, I think it's all just kind of predictable too. Like I said, I think people just weren't blown away because there wasn't anything exciting and new. Like I think it's just, these are all the features we've seen from Sony all in one camera, which is itself a cool thing to have, but there's no individual thing here that's really wowing anybody.
And that is like a little surprising to me, in that every camera release that we've gotten from Sony in recent years has brought something. And it seems like this camera release for the A1 II didn't bring anything. It just summed it up.
Yeah.
Here's everything.
Yeah.
All in one.
It does seem that way.
And whenever they come out with called the A7S IV or something next year, who knows? Like, it's going to have new features potentially. Are they going to bring it? Are they going to backport it? And the answer is probably no.
Yeah, because they usually don't.
So it's a tough sell in that regard of like, do you want everything that Sony's ever invented, except for vertical menus, in one camera? Like, here it is. But it's only going to be that for the next 8 months, and then it'll be behind again.
Yeah. Yep.
I think this is the second camera that Sony's released this year.
Really?
Mm-hmm. It's been pretty quiet from Sony.
Yeah. Well, hopefully next year I have some exciting stuff, because I know like I really want to see what FX6 Mark II looks like, and we're probably due for an S series, like A7S series camera.
Yeah, they haven't bumped the S in quite a while, so I'm interested to see what happens. We'll do a rumor roundup or something probably at the very beginning of next year.
Yeah. Sounds good.
This wasn't the only thing that they announced, Daniel.
What else did they announce?
They announced a lens.
A lens, but Sony doesn't make any lenses. I think I saw recently that there are like 77 E-mount lenses, something like that.
There's so many lenses. Okay, they announced a new 28-70 lens.
Yep.
And I know what you're thinking. Lucas, they already make a 28-70 f3.5 to 5.6. That's $400. What could they do to improve that? It's the same range, and like 3.5 to 5.6, it's full frame.
Yeah.
Why would you ever need anything faster?
What could be better?
What could be better? This one goes to f2.
This one goes to f2. I think there's actually a Canon lens with these same specs.
There is a Canon lens with the same specs. And that lens kind of stood on its own until Sigma came out with their 28 to 70 f2.
It's like somebody discovered this optical formula, and then now everybody's repeating the same thing.
But like that Canon has been... I'm like looking up the Sigma while I'm trying to talk. That Canon has been in production for like 2 years.
Yeah.
It has been quite a while since someone's tried to compete with Canon, because like it's like Canon has these like really fast lenses. Like, why is no one else making these really fast lenses?
Yeah, and I mean, like I'm gonna be interested to hear what you think of this versus 24 to 70, because like, like the classic lens is 24 to 70 f2.8. This, you lose a little bit on the wide end, but you go to f2, and that has been an interesting trade-off with Canon, and now you can make that same decision on Sony.
I'm not finding that lens for Sigma. Maybe I'm thinking of the 28 to 45 1.8.
I did think it existed. Maybe it was like a rumor or something, but for some reason I thought they were coming out with something like that.
Regardless, I think that 28 to 70 f2 for Canon was kind of a brand selling lens. It's like, Canon is doing innovative things with our mount. Look at these lenses that we make that nobody else makes. And you have like the 24 to 105 f2.8 and the 28 to 70 f2 and these really good lenses. It's nice to see that Sony is like finally competing, and maybe like it took them 2 years to develop this thing, but they did come out and make something that was actually better. Like optically, probably similar. This is like, it's like a full-on G Master, and it does all the G Master things where it's like pretty decently well controlled for chromatic aberration. It's got 11 aperture blades, and so the bokeh's all like super round and stuff. And it has all the good coatings, and so like it controls flares fairly reasonably. Even though it's an f2 lens, it goes all the way up to f22.
That's unusual.
Yeah, it doesn't cap out at like f16 or f18, like all the way to 22. And like they have all the features that you could ever want on it. It's got like a declicked aperture that you can like turn on and off so you can have the clicks or not. It's got a switch where it goes from like tight zooming to smooth zooming. It has like all the things. And it's still whatever, like a quarter pound lighter than the Canon, and it's shorter. It's like a smaller lens.
Yeah. I mean, it does sound like an improvement over that original design, and maybe that justifies why it took them longer to release this.
It's still wildly expensive. I mean, the other 28 to 70 we were talking about is only $400. This one is $2,900.
Now the Canon one, I think, is right around the same price.
Yeah.
I think it's like $2,800 maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Canon's basically the same price. And I get it. Like, these lenses are super expensive to manufacture, and the elements in them are huge. This thing has like 4 motors for the autofocus system in order just to get the glass to move.
Well, and the front filter thread's 86 millimeters. Like, it's massive.
It's huge. It's enormous. But it's good. If you're looking for something that can replace a sack of primes, like, this is probably it. Because it goes 20. Well, it doesn't go to 24, but it's 28 on the wide end. So maybe not as wide as you want it to be. But you can get 28, 35, 50, and 70 all within one range. And it has a 1:4 magnification ratio, so you can get decently close. Mm-hmm. And it's super fast. So it's definitely a do everything lens. It's just, it is as heavy as bringing the 4 primes with you.
Yeah, it is.
So it's you're not really saving any weight compared to just bringing a 24, 35, 50, and 70 with you. But even still,
if you were a Sony bro, do you think you'd be looking at this lens?
I would drool all over it and then never buy it because it costs $2,900.
Man, those full frame lenses are expensive. I think that we've mentioned on the show before. I think since our main cameras are APS-C, we kind of get we kind of filter ourselves to that pricing. But this price is high for a full frame lens, but it's not insane for these brand new super high quality, whether it's G Master or an RF mount L series lens. All of the lenses are about that expensive.
Yeah. You can find some Sigma stuff that's $1,500 or whatever. Mm-hmm. And if I was in the full frame world, I would just have less lenses. Yeah. And I probably could stand to have less lenses. I just have too many.
Yep.
Anyways,
you do have a problem.
Sure. Yeah. 3, 4 lenses is probably the appropriate amount of lenses for most people. Daniel, how many lenses is the appropriate amount of lenses for a person?
I would say 3 to 5, but you're over there with 11.
It's not that many. We're not going to rehash that right now.
Yep.
Point is, if I was a full frame guy, I would have 3 to 5 lenses because that's probably the equivalent cost of the lenses that I do have.
I think so.
Fine, you find the good ones that you need and you buy it and you stick with it. And it just kind of costs what it costs because these things are huge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You probably get what you pay for, in terms of how big the glass is and stuff. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
I think this is a really good release from them. I think that if they're going to compete with Canon, having a Sony branded G Master general purpose zoom that is as fast as that Canon is, it was important.
Yeah.
And the price is competitive. It has a really good breathing control. It's got custom buttons on it. It does all the things. They pulled out all the stops for this thing. And I think they hit it out of the park. This is going to be a really good lens for some people, and it will, in some cases, probably keep people from switching away from systems. There are some lenses that you might switch systems for.
Yeah.
If you really want a Plena, you're not going to get that Plena anywhere else than Nikon. It's maybe you switch systems for it. I don't know.
How many times have you considered switching to Sony just for that Tamron 35 to 150?
Frequently. I have dreams about it.
Mm-hmm. So,
I haven't done it yet, but I don't know. It's for me on full frame 35 to 150. I guess that's helpful and useful. It's just on APS-C it would be better because it's so good. It's the 50 to 140, but more range and faster. Why don't they just remount it for Fuji, Daniel?
That's it for the show today. Thanks for joining us, and if you liked it, tell a friend so they can check it out too. You can find out more about the show at www.cameragearpodcast.com, and you can find us on Twitter @CameraGearPod. We'll be back with more next week.